everyone, welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be doing some Bible journaling with Joy Claire stamps. I have used this stamp set before. I will leave that link in the top right hand corner, but I'm going to be combining two different Color by Faith Series stamp sets from Joy Claire. The first on the right is called My Redeemer, and the stamp set on the left is called Faith Quotes. Now, Faith Quotes is a great stamp set to have on hand if you are a Bible journaler, just because it's got so many different little sentiments and sayings in it that you can combine with other types of Bible journaling stamps or your own hand-drawn images. Now, the one on the right, which was called My Redeemer, is traditionally, I've used it before, and it's more of an Easter sort of stamp set to use. However, I combined it with the Faith Quotes to stretch it even further and use it in different places. So I'm going to be in Isaiah chapter 53, specifically verse 5. Now I want to highlight that verse because it really means a lot to me. This is something that whenever my aunt or my mother, they were praying, this would be the verse they would say when they were praying it. I can always remember specifically them repeating this verse every time they prayed for someone who was sick or just kind of feeling down. So this verse is really special to me. I want to make sure it's highlighted in my Bible. So in order to do that, I want to go ahead and mask it off and leave it completely free of any color. This is a very super easy way to just kind of highlight anything where you're going to add a lot of color around it just by leaving it white. Now, the painter's tape I have on hand isn't quite thin enough to just mask off that verse. So I needed about a ½ inch wide, and this is about 3/4 of an inch. One way I get by with having just one roll of painter's tape on hand is to cut it to the size I need it with my paper trimmer. I just line it up at the ½ inch mark or whatever mark I need it at, and then I can just cut it with my paper trimmer. My paper trimmer cuts it like butter. It's super easy to cut, and then you just peel it up, and because you can keep sticking painter's tape down again and again and again, it just goes right where you need it to. You can peel it up, and then I'm just going to place it right down in my Bible over verse 5. I'm using a T-square ruler just to kind of get it straight across my Bible. I want the entire line really masked off here and free of all color. So I pushed it down into the seam very carefully and also all the way over to the edge. I left it very long so then I wouldn't have to measure it. I could just come in with my scissors and cut it down to size wherever I needed it. Now I'm going to be using a circle die to draw out some hills. But I first want to stamp my cross. So I'm going to use that circle die as a placeholder to know where my first hill is going to be drawn. And then using some black dye ink. This is just a regular black dye ink that I know works really well in my Bible and doesn't smear. I'm going to go ahead and ink up that cross stamp from the My Redeemer stamp set and stamp it down. Before I stamp it down, I removed that circle die. I just needed it as a placeholder to see exactly where I wanted to stamp my cross. I stamped that down. I like to hold it and really press it for a few seconds, and then I dropped it. Now, if you are like me and you are clumsy and you do this sometimes, right as soon as you drop it, take a sanding block and start sanding away. You don't want to be rough with your Bible pages. And inevitably, this is all going to be colored with this dressing, but I do want to get up a little bit of it so it's easier to cover later on. It's not going to be perfect, but I wanted to get some of that ink up. So I just take a very light sanding block and just kind of go over it as much as I can without damaging the page. Now, also in that My Redeemer stamp set is this little dove. I'm going to go ahead and stamp him right above the cross just to add a little something extra to this page. And as I'm stamping these images, I am stamping them on masking paper. That is Inkadinkado masking paper. I showed that at the beginning of the video. You can also use that to mask off your verse if you wanted to. I like to use painter's tape just because the masking paper can get a little bit on the expensive side, So if I can use painter's tape, I try to do that, or post-it notes first, and save my masking paper for more stamped image occasions. I'm also going to take that Faith Quotes verse stamp that is in there, and I am inking it up with that same black dye ink, and I lay these out beforehand. I lay my stamps out beforehand to kind of get an idea of where I want them to go. With cards, if you mess up and you really don't like something, you can tear it apart, you can throw it away. But with my Bible, I'm not going to throw it away. So I like to make sure I get it halfway decent the first time. So I went ahead and inked that up, made sure it was inked up very well, and then I stamp it down. Again, I'm going to hold that just for a few seconds, give it a good press. I don't know if this does anything, but in my head it does, so I do it every single time I stamp, and then I slowly peel away that stamp. Now in there it says, by his wounds we are healed, but the I in the his is actually a nail. So I just used the leftover ink on the stamp to stamp that down onto a piece of masking paper. I fussy cut out those masks just with some fine detail scissors, very quick and easy to do. And now I'm going to draw on my hills. I'm going to use that same circle die that I used beforehand and a micron pen. You can use any black pen, you just want to make sure that it's not going to smear on your pages as you're drawing or as you're ink blending over it. So I'm using that just as a guide, the circle die as a guide. You can use anything that is circular that you might have on hand. So a plate, you can use a die cut. You can just free draw these with your hand if you want to. I just am not a great drawer, so I like to use something on hand that already gives me that shape. I'll go ahead and place that first circle down and trace around it, and then on either side of that one I'm going to go ahead and draw a few more in, just that look as if they're in the background. This is super simple and easy to make a scene this way, and it doesn't take any time at all. And again, because I masked out that verse first, that is a hard thing to say, with the painter's tape, everything underneath that painter's tape is going to stay nice and clear of any ink, any color that might go on this Bible journaling page. Now with that little set of hills that I drew, I am going to need a mask. So I am just taking a piece of computer paper. You can see through this since it's so thin, and I just draw along the lines right in the center, because I'm going to need not only the bottom of this, but I'm going to need the top as well. So I cut along those lines with just some scissors, and I'm going to use the top to mask off the sky portion. Now this is just a quick and easy way. You can always go in and be more precise with this, but this usually works out for me, and it's a nice, cheap, easy, quick way to get a mask for something I've hand drawn on myself. I am using this brush to go ahead and apply some green ink. This is going to give me a very light hand right at the bottom where I want it. Then once I get the color down, the first layer, I'm going to come in with my ink blending tool and kind of darken it up towards the top and where I want some more shadow. I am masking off the page on the left hand side just because I don't want any ink to get on there. Now the brush I'm using is actually an electrician's brush. It's from my husband's work kit. He doesn't need it anymore, and so I stole it from him. He never really used it, but it works great for my crafting area. So that is what I am using today. You can use any brush you have on hand. Just laying down the first color with this really helps me get a nice even layer, and also it doesn't crinkle up my pages. When I go in with my ink blending tool, I have to be super careful that my pages don't crinkle up and crease on me with a heavier hand. So I like to go in and really go to town with my brush first, and then I can come in with some nice shadows with my ink blending tool. I have to be a little bit more careful with this, but it's what works for me. You can always do whatever works for you. And if you don't want to go in with a brush at first, you just want to get that color on, you can always use a makeup sponge, and that's a little bit easier also instead of the ink blending tool. Once I had the grassy hills the way I wanted them, I'm going to go ahead and remove that mask, and then I'm going to mask off. I've already masked off the cross with my Inkadinkado mask that I cut beforehand, but now I'm going to need to mask off the dove in the top right hand corner, and also the little nail that's in the sentiment above. I'm also using that bottom portion to mask off the hills now that they're the color I want them. And then with that top mask, I'm going to go ahead and place that on the left hand side to keep my left hand page free of any ink in case I want to go back and Bible journal on it at a later date. Now, to make that sun background is super easy. I know it looks complicated, but I promise it's not hard at all. I'm starting off with some mustard seed distress ink, and I am going to put this everywhere. Now, I am using my ink blending tool, but instead of circular motions, which really get the crinkling going on, I'm just kind of pouncing up and down and just getting the color on. Right now, it's going to look a little splotchy. That's okay. The majority of this will be covered up and have multiple layers on it. So I just like to go in and get the color on the page. Again, I've got those masks down, so you want to be a little bit careful working around those so you don't shift them or pull them up. You'll start adding more layers of painter's tape on and they'll be really stuck down later on, so you don't want to press too hard on them. But once I got that first layer of mustard seed down, I'm going to come in with some painter's tape. This again is that same painter's tape I used beforehand. It's the 3/4 inch. You can use whatever size you want. This is just what I had on hand, and I didn't feel like cutting it down, to be quite honest. You can cut it down and make more stripes in the long run if you want to. I put 4 pieces of that down. I made sure that I had a little bit of where they connected at the bottom. I didn't want them to connect above the hills, if that made any sense. So I made sure they all connected to the bottom, so each stripe went all the way down to those hills. Now, in between each one of those, I'm going to come in and add another very heavy-handed layer of that mustard seed. This is going to darken up those areas where the painter's tape is not, but anywhere where the painter's tape is, it's going to keep that very light layer of color. Now I'm going to come in with another layer of tape. Again, I am making sure that these connect below or right at the hill area. I do not want them connecting up above that. That's going to give it a little bit of a funny look. And I'm also going to add in a few other layers. Now, these that I am laying down, I want them to connect to the painter's tape that I've already put down. Then, once I get those down, I'm going to come in with a little bit of spice marmalade. I'm making these very nice, and each layer, I guess you could say, as I'm going in, I'm making my little layers or my little sunburst areas thinner. So I put quite a few layers of painter's tape down, 2 over each one, and then I added a few more on the right hand side and on the left hand side. And then I'll come in with that spice marmalade color and go right over the top of the mustard seed. Again, this is going to keep, the first layer is going to be a very light yellow. Then where I put that second layer down, it's going to be a darker yellow. And now where I'm putting the color down, it's going to go into an orange. Now once I get this orange on, again I'm using a pretty heavy hand towards the bottom. As I go up, I'm using a lighter hand. And then right towards the bottom of that hill, I'm going to add just a very tiny bit of festive berries. This is going to add in that reddish color and really darken it up. Now that I've got all the color on, I've got to take off the painter's tape. This is something you want to take your time with. Painters, I did go in the first, before I even put this down, and kind of pushed it against my shirt a little bit, and that's going to take a little bit of the stickiness away. But with this many layers, you just want to be extra careful and take your time as you remove this. If you see it starting to pull away at the page, stop pulling it. Put it back down and go to the other side of the painter's tape and pull it from that way. That way you're not going to rip it. You can see right there, it started to pull away. I stopped, I pushed it back down, and now I'm going to come up and pull it from the opposite way with these 2 pieces that started to pull a little bit from the paper. Now it's going to pull up your mask. That's okay, we're all done with them at this point. So if it pulls any up, that's fine. But there you can see I've got that great sunburst in the background. All it took was some distress inks and some painter's tape and just placing them down kind of in a sunburst pattern. It was super simple and easy to do. Once I got the sunburst done, I did leave that mask down on the bottom just for now. I want to pull that up last. I'm going to go ahead and color in my stamped images. You can use whatever color medium you like. I'm using my colored pencils, my Prismacolored pencils to be exact, just to get a little bit of blending and shading. And it's just a great way to add some very vibrant color very quickly on my Bible journaling pages, and I know it's not going to bleed through. I've used these a ton of times, and I just really like the way they blend onto the paper in my Bible, and also the amount of pigment and color you can get with them. I'm using some browns and some red on that heart. And then for my little dove, you could leave him white and that would be amazing, but I like to add a little bit of shading with a gray color. And then I come in and blend that out with an even lighter one. The great thing about your Prismacolored pencils, they have a lot of grays in them, so you can do different shading with them. Then I added a little bit of gray to that nail that is in the sentiment that I used. And the last thing that I am going to do is pull up that mask. Again, I want to be super careful when doing this. This has had a lot of layers over it, so it's had a lot of pressure over it, so I need to be extra careful when pulling up this last one. And there I've got the verse that inspired this whole page right there masked out, and your eye is just immediately drawn to it because I left it free of any color. And just to add even the tiniest bit more emphasis to it, I'm going to take that micron pen that I used to draw out the hills. I'm going to take that with my T-square ruler and just kind of outline that masked area with it. That's going to help separate it and also kind of finish off the page, if you will. That final touch really helped pull the whole thing together. Excuse my hair on the left hand side there, but I needed to look straight over so I could get this all lined up. Now, whenever I first put my mask down, it wasn't quite even. That's okay. It's a little off. It's not horrible, so I am still happy with it. But you can see whenever you put that first mask down, you need to be extra careful so it's not off like mine was. But that does it for this page. This was super easy to do. This page looks a lot more complicated than it was to pull together, and it took very few supplies. The majority of the supplies that I used were painter's tape and distress inks. The rest of it was just a little bit of coloring, a little bit of stamping, and I absolutely love the sunburst in the background. I was a little scared putting this together. I thought I would need a stencil to do it, but I am so happy with the layering technique that it just worked out so well. Now, I have used the My Redeemer stamp set before. There's a look at that page, so you can see you can use this stamp set in so many different ways. All you need is some different sentiments to really kind of switch it up, and that Faith Quotes is the perfect one to do it. That is one of my favorite Bible journaling sets by far. Here are a few finished photos of the Bible journaling page that I did today. As always, I want to thank you guys so much for watching today. And like I said before, I have used both of these stamp sets before. I will leave links to them down in the description box if you want to see more inspiration with them. There are a few different links on the left side of your screen that you can click on. Happy crafting, everyone!